So when you first got involved with the Newsboys in 1997.
1994.
94. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where did I get 1997 from? It's probably Take Me to Your Leader was like the first Newsboys album that I kind of got. And I was looking at it, and that's the first album that you were playing on, right?
Yeah, so I came on right after an album called Not Ashamed. And the keyboard player at that time, he had gone back to Australia or something like that. And so I played for that tour, and then I was only like 19 at the time. So back then there was just like guys coming and going, and I think everybody was a little bit like, let's not commit like to a full-time thing until we know. So I was actually on the following record in 95 called Going Public, and that's the record that had Shine on it. But I wasn't in any of the pictures or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And then it was, Take Me to Your Leader was the first, record that had my pictures on it and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And you have this cool story where you were like driving the band around.
Yeah.
And when they were on a tour,
mm-hmm.
and you became best good friends.
Well, it was funny because, when people ask, how'd you join the band, the band at the time was from Australia. I was from Detroit. And so a friend of mine, a youth pastor, he was promoting a Newsboys show in a high school gym right near where I lived. And he knew that my mom had just bought this Chevy Astro minivan. It was like one of those conversion vans. It was... And he was like, man, would you be willing to drive the band around town during the day while they're here? You have these guys called the runner who drives the artists around to, just do whatever they need to do, laundry, whatever. So I drove the guys to and from the hotel on the day and got to know Peter, the lead singer, and we had just bought the same keyboard. And so we were talking about that. And I got to know the guys in the band. It was a really fun experience. I didn't really think anything else of it, but people behind the scenes that I knew were like, "Oh, that guy plays keyboard. He's great." Blah blah blah, all this stuff. So they were talking behind my back. And about 3 months later, I was coming home from a night class in college, and I was 18, and my mom says to me, this guy with an Australian accent called, he wants you to call him back as soon as possible. So I look at the little slip of paper. It says Peter Furler. I'm like, no way, that's weird. So I call up and he says, our keyboard player's moving on and we need somebody like ASAP. And so I knew they were playing out on the other side of the state that very next week. And he's like, well, just learn all the songs and we'll meet you out there. Mm-hmm. And, this was back before cell phones, texting, it's hard to get in touch with anyone. And it was click. And I'm like, what? So I stayed home from college for that week and just hung out in my parents' basement trying to learn all the songs as best I could. I drove out to meet the band that weekend. And they're like, well, if you want, why don't you just set up all your stuff on stage and play along with us? We'll listen, our manager will listen, and we'll just see how that goes. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. There was about 2,500 people showed up. This was near Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I did the audition. They're like, oh, that was good. Why don't you play the show tonight? So I played the show that night.
Why not?
That night. I don't even think most of the band or crew even remembered what my name was, and I'm on stage with the band.
Right.
And after that, we load down, tear down, load the trucks, everything like that. And I hopped into the bus and I said, well, what do you guys want to do? And they're like, well, we're in Indianapolis next weekend. Why don't you just drive down and we'll see you there? So I drive home. I was like, Mom and Dad, I think I'm going to be dropping out of college tomorrow and moving to Nashville.
That's great.
And
so did you play with any other bands at that time? Like, were you playing with guys in town, local?
A little bit, yeah. And I was doing like DJing. I was like a techno DJ. That was real popular at the time, raves and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I was in like 2 or 3 other bands, and then I was going to college full time too. So when I told my parents, now that I'm a parent of 4 kids, I don't know how they were able to just take that and just be cool with it, Mm-hmm. And they were like, okay, we trust God. That's what he's got for you. And this was not like, we're not talking about the successful Newsboys that people know now. This was like before anything was really happening. And
it was about to happen.
It was about to happen.
You might even be able to say you were responsible for the ascension of the Newsboys into...
I don't know about that.
So that was funny. So that was 27 years ago. And now I just realized remember when I said 1997, that's where I got that 7 from, because you said when we were talking beforehand, 27 years ago is when that all began. And like when you look back on all that, and so you and I first met not that long ago. One of your kids is involved in a theater program that we have here at the church. And you were sitting out in the hallway, and I said, hello, hey, how you doing? You're like, well, I'm just putting together a set list for one of the shows. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And then your official title, like you're the band, are you band director, show director?
I don't know if you could put an official title on it. I'm just the guy that does all the things that no one else wants to do. So I think I've just accumulated titles over 27 years.
Which is funny
to get to this point.
Every time I see you sitting out in the hall working, like you have a different production part of the show pulled up on your computer that you're working on. So it's like...
Well, you have to get creative when you have so many kids and you're on tour a lot, so when you're home and you've got to find little blocks of time where you can get work done. And there's always something to be done. There's always some detail left undone or whatever. But I never, I get asked a ton of questions about like, how did you get into this, or how did you do this, or like, how did you learn that? And my story is not... It's not the typical story, I didn't go to school to really learn any of it. I just got thrown into the fire. And I remember, in 1994, when I was 19 years old, it was Peter who threw me into the fire. They were working on the record that Shine is on. And, Peter said, well, why don't you come into the studio every day and just work in here and whatever. Well, back then... it wasn't like today where everyone's got a laptop and you can learn and we all have the same tools. Back then, if you wanted to record music, you had to go in a studio and it costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there's gear like that you'd never seen before. Right. So I got thrown right into it, and that's how I learned.
So that wasn't even like something you were doing before that. It was like a love that you acquired as you went.
Well, I couldn't because no one could afford to do that back as a kid. So to get into all that gear. And so it was just learn on the fly. And I remember, Peter would say, I need you to do this, and I'll be back in tomorrow. And I would just be like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to use anything in here, And so that's, that whole, I think that's the difference between, culturally back then and now. It's like now everybody wants their plan perfectly put in front of them. They want to know exactly how it's going to go. They want to go to some school so they can learn it and have a degree, but real life doesn't work that way most of the time. You just gotta jump in there and start swimming.
So when did that take place? Like, we're talking about now, you kind of take over the lead, like putting together set lists, planning show stuff, whatever. Yeah. When did that start to happen in Newsboys?
It was always kind of in there. I always kind of like dreaming. Anybody who's creative, you always love to dream up ideas. And the great thing about our organization, it is a team effort. So it's not just one guy. I mean, everyone's got a place, kind of like a church, would operate. But the cool thing about our band is that we've always dreamed way bigger than what is logical or practical. Maybe you remember, maybe you don't, but we've done tours in inflatable air domes, and it was always like, how do we just do something that no one else has done? And and some of it is like because we love our fans and want to do something cool for them, and then half of it I think is just for our own amusement to see if we could actually do it.
What's so interesting? You brought up the air dome tour, and was that the Love Liberty Disco?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's interesting about that? I remember going to see that show in Oklahoma. I was living in Oklahoma at the time.
Yeah.
And it was out in the middle of this huge mall parking lot.
That's amazing that you saw it.
Whatever. Yes.
Yeah.
And loved it, right?
Yeah.
And so I talk about this all the time in ministry. The stories that you tell and the things that you remember the most are when things don't always go right.
Exactly.
If everything always goes perfect, you forget it and you never tell anybody about it, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So I loved that show, like being in that tent and being the whole thing. It was only years later that I heard that was a very interesting tour behind the scenes as far as like being able to pull that production off.
Oh, it was a nightmare, and I'm surprised that you saw it when it was actually inflated.
Oh, really?
You know? Oh, yeah. Like there was all kinds of design problems in the inflatable dome. The guy who created it, and so. In fact, it started really poorly as well because we were supposed to do all the rehearsals and the pre-productions here in Nashville at 100 Oaks Mall area, and they set up the domes there. Well, it was in February, thinking, that would be a decent time to do it. Well, it thunderstormed every single day of the rehearsals, and we did not even play a note. And the domes were having enough trouble just staying inflated. There was supposed to be this 360 seating arrangements for all these people, and everything was just falling apart. And at the same time, like USA Today was flying in and doing stories on it and all this stuff. And so we go out on the first weekend and it's just a complete disaster. Like nothing is working. And it turned out that the band was out there. We were like, if we don't fix this whole thing is going to fall apart. And we had to learn how to weld. Like Jody's still got scars on his legs from welding metal together and trying to salvage this thing. And we did. But a lot of nights it just couldn't hold up to the weather or it would blow over. There was one night where the generators ran out of gas and the dome fell on people's heads while they were inside of it. All kinds of stories.
Dome full of people.
3,000 people inside, and it lost pressure.
I must have caught it on the night when everything was perfect, everything was good. And I would say, Jeff, do it again, man. And you would say, no way.
Well, if you go back and you look at pictures of the tour, the band pre-tour and post-tour, like everyone looks like they aged about 10 years.
Really?
It's really crazy. Yeah, it was not. And it was tough on our families and stuff too. And it was tough on us because, when you tour in a bus and do venues, it feels like you're in a different place every night because the buildings are different every night. But we were just out on a field in a bus, and everything felt the same every single day. And
so whose idea, like any of the tours at that point, whose idea was that? And maybe you don't want to
at the time it was a necessity because we were touring tons of venues in the U.S. every year, and in the Christian music industry is not as profitable or big, or the revenue is different than country or anything else. We all know that, but we were just getting killed because if you wanted to go to Chicago or Detroit or a major city or a major theater, the union, by the time you paid your union bills and all these crazy high expenses in these cities, we just, there was no profit to be made touring. And that's what we did. It was just a different, it was a different time back then. And so we were like, well, let's just cut all that out. We'll just make our own theater, take it with us and set it up somewhere. And fans will think it's great because it's a different, something different and new and something they haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And so for the people that did see it, they loved it and they have a lot of good memories of it.
Yeah.
But for the band, it was,
Yeah. One of the things I've always loved though about Newsboys and the sound, like you guys playing, is especially in the Christian music realm, I always refer to it as a time when like each individual band was so unique.
Yes.
And so you couldn't go, you wouldn't mix them up. Everybody had a different lead singer, sounded different. Everyone had a different style, different whatever. And you guys were always on the front end of really pushing creative limits.
It is really unfortunate in a lot of ways that I have to explain that very thing to people, to younger people. Like they just don't understand that like there was so much more personality and so many more bands. And it's like now, there was no pressure to conform to a certain style or, you're really free to just be like your mainstream counterparts and just have fun. Now it's like, for us, we had so many records and tours and things that were failures. That's how we learned and that's how we got better.
Yeah.
But if you're like an artist now, it's like you can't afford to make a mistake or you're done. It's like one and done.
Right.
And there's just the industry is so much smaller and so much different. And then obviously there's a lot of pressure for artists to make music that fits on a radio format. Because if it doesn't, then it really hampers their ability to get out there in front of people. But then by hampering their, or by trying to conform to a certain format on the radio, it doesn't allow them to be who they are, which also hinders them from being original. So,
right.
Yeah, we were fortunate to come up through those years, we were able to do really cool things and then really big failures too, and learn. But
one of the things, so about a year ago, we had the Christian group Whiteheart did their 30th reunion show for one of their biggest albums, Freedom. And I was able to, we were talking with the guys beforehand and just kind of a similar conversation to what we're having right now. And, you know, we just, the idea, like, gone are the days when, so your previous release, okay, even if it was successful, like the next release would come out. And so for someone like me, I'm going to the store, I'm buying your CD, right? And I put that in, and a lot of times it would be a completely different direction for the band, like a new experiment. Like even us talking about the Liberty Disco thing. Yeah. You know, you put that in, you're like, wow, that's a risk, but it's so cool that you did it. You know, so I always wonder in bands, especially with the name recognition of Newsboys or you know, even I go back into the day of a DC Talk or whatever it may be, bands that had success and go, hey, let's try something new.
Yeah.
Know?
Well, you know, also with that is, you know, you're only as good as your last record. That's the crazy thing about the music industry. It's like, it's one of the few ones where you are literally having to apply. Now it's a little bit different now because you've got streaming and you can put things out on a more regular basis and keep people engaged in your socials. And it's not just one big push for this is your thing. Like back in the day, like your record would last you for 18 months or 2 years, and that was the theme and that was the push. And if that didn't work, then that's 2 years you were going to be suffering with whatever you made that didn't work, you know. So that's the difference between then and now. But yeah, it was very risky. Like it's one of the only industries where, you know, you have to basically reapply for your job every 18 months. Yeah. Or people move on.
Right. So you guys, okay, this is very well known now, so we're not covering new territory here, but so you're in the band, Peter Furler's the lead singer, and then in 2009-ish, right? Yeah. Then there's a change, and we know about that. Michael Tate comes in, he's the lead singer. Yeah. But I'm more curious for you as a member of the band and kind of like where were you, it was very tough. What was the feeling like? What's the future? Especially, you know, you've been doing it for a while.
Yeah, at that time we had been doing it for a while, and it was really tough. In fact, right, 2009, I think we were expecting our first kid, and I remember I was working on a record with Peter at his house, and I showed up one morning at his house. We had a studio in his house, and he said that, you know, he was kind of done. I think it was like a summer when I remember I walked into the studio and he had talked about like Creation decided which was the biggest Christian festival in the country. We had played it for like 20 straight years. They decided to pass and not book us that year. And he was like kind of seemed upset about that. And like, oh, it's over, you know, or something like that. And, you know, he had been touring straight for 20 years, which I totally get, and was kind of just burnt out of just doing that, what we just talked about, that same cycle, that same pressure that's always on you. And it's being like the lead singer and songwriter type guy. I think he's just like, man, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So we were just about to finish a record and he was talking about leaving. And so ironically, Michael Tate had come to visit. You know, obviously we'd known Michael for a long time. He had been living out in California, working on some solo projects. He was singing for like Carlos Santana and doing some stuff out there. And he just came in to hang out and sing some background vocals, you know. And so he was kind of hanging around the studio for a couple days. Well, you know, things don't stop, right? So we had shows booked like a year in advance. Yeah, right. And so, you know, Peter wants to step aside, and we had like this, you know, meeting of the minds down at like Sperry's with our manager and some record company people and like the band guys. And we're like, what do we do? Like, who do we get? Like, we felt like we didn't want to just stop, you know, when you put like 20 years into something. And so our manager was like, well, what about Michael Tate? And we're like, from DC Talk? How in the heck is that going to work, you know? So Michael comes in and we do a bunch of rehearsals, and it kind of goes good. It kind of goes bad, though. He's having a hard time feeling like, he's singing karaoke. Like, we didn't want it to be like karaoke version of Ourselves with a different lead singer. Like, the two guys are so different. We knew that it was going to have to take something completely different to make it work. So, but at the same time, we have all these shows booked with people expecting Peter to be there.
Right.
And honestly, we had some really horrible shows at first. In fact, with Michael, as he was kind of getting his feet wet, and one of them was at like an Acquire the Fire event in North Carolina, and we laugh about this now, so that's why it's funny. But he just had one of those nights where he just had a horrible night, forgot words, just, when you, like any of us, you start to lose track and you're on stage, and then it's like, snowballs. And it was so bad that he just left the stage and was really embarrassed, and he just kind of ran down the street. He just had to get away.
Get it out and express his frustration.
And so I get off stage, and I go to check my phone in the dressing room, and I get a text from my wife, and she says, I just took a pregnancy test. We're expecting our first kid. I'm like, I'm going to be a dad, and I lost my job on
Michael?
the same day.
I'm going to need you to come back in here, Michael, and sing these songs.
Yeah. So it was a come to Jesus moment, and I think that was like a turning point. We all like know it was, and so we went into the studio, and then that's when Born Again came out, and then a couple years later God's Not Dead came out, and then the movies came out, and then all that was started snowballing in a better direction.
Right. But once again, to me, like what I hear in it is like the willingness to take a risk and
absolutely
do something that's going to go in a different direction, right?
Yeah.
Because from an outsider and a listener, so Newsboys, you guys had a sound, right? And then the announcement's made, we're going to have this new lead singer. It's Michael Tate from DC Talk, and it's going to be this whole thing. And so instead of just going, hey, let's just stay comfortable in this style of music that we have, Born Again comes out, and you're like, okay, that's a totally different.
Slaps you in the face.
Yes, and it's all in line with who the band has been, which is a risk-taking band.
And that's me too. Like I'm a pretty conservative guy. Like people that know me, like it's just the way I am. My dad was the same way. I'm very I'm not a risk taker type of guy, but when it comes to music, I would rather take the chance at something than just kind of ride the same old thing that works, because it's just a slow death for a career at that point. And that's not just for Christian music, it's for anything. You know what you're going to get if you do that.
And the other cool thing about going back to you helping putting shows together, and I don't know, is producer the right word? Production of pulling the light sound,
Swiss Army knife,
all that. And you guys have always, when you go to a Newsboys show, you get more than your money's worth.
Right.
You get a full scale production that's up there with anybody you're going to go see.
Yeah.
And for a fraction of the ticket price that you're going to pay.
As much as we can fit in our truck. Yeah, that's the thing. And that is a challenge too, because you it's a double-edged sword. You, as a Christian artist, you want to put on a show that's as good or better than anything else that's out there visually or whatever. At the same time, a lot of people that come to our shows don't expect the ticket price to be over $20.
Yeah, right.
So a lot of those same families
something has to give here.
That'll spend $150 for their Justin Bieber ticket will be all of a sudden upset if our ticket is $30 the next week. But they expect a laser to fly over their head as well. So we've become masters at budgeting as well.
It looks great. I mean,
thanks.
The shows I've seen. In fact, this goes back several years. One of the tours you guys were on where you even got to get on one of the cranes, and the crane took you out over the crowd. And
yes, my wife was not happy about that tour. Which, again, another story about what are you guys thinking? Yeah, those were actually those were bucket cranes. So long story short, for listeners at home, we got on these platforms that flew all around the arenas, flew over the crowds, whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, all those were just like cherry picker construction things that we bought, and we took them to Duck Welding here in Nashville and chopped off the buckets and just built these aluminum platforms. And then we trained guys how to use the controls. Uh-huh. And then I built a keyboard stand on top of the aluminum thing. And like literally there was nothing safety-wise holding us on those.
You didn't have any kind of like harness or any kind of like tie-in thing?
I mean, I did have a belt that tied into.
You could have wore angel wings. You could have had something.
I probably should have. So basically, if you fell off it, I mean, I might have broke my back. It would have probably kept me from falling onto a fan, but that was about it. That's why I had handlebars on the side so I could hold.
But you would have finished the show. I know you would have. You would have had the guitar or something. So
we took those. And I had my whole rig on there, everything, like the tracks, everything run through wires down the thing. And so we took that out on Winter Jam, because when Michael joined the band, Winter Jam was a huge tour, like arenas, people waiting for hours outside. Right. It was a big thing at the time. So we're like, if we're going to do this, we got to blow it out big. Our show's got to be amazing. So we got these cranes, and we would have this big dramatic intro. Funny thing about people's attention spans nowadays, like, I would be on the crane like 40 feet in the air on the second level of arenas playing keyboards suspended in midair. And I would look at this like 14, 15-year-old kids in the second dome, second tier.
Second level, right?
The second level. I'm like eye to eye with them playing. And they're like looking at me like, oh, that's cool. And then like 2 minutes later, they're like on their phone, like just like checking their texts. Like no big deal.
I'm not impressed.
If this can't impress anyone, I give up. Because I'm risking my life.
Let's stop the show. We cut cranes in half for this.
I don't even trust the people running this thing. I'm putting my life on the line right now.
You want to hear Shine? You want to hear Shine? I'll play it right now.
Yeah, we did not enjoy being on those, although they looked amazing.
It did. And the smoke going at the right time. I'm telling you. See, it's not even knowing any of that background of what it took to actually pull that off. For me, I might have been that guy sitting in the second level that you were looking at. I was probably trying, how do I do this camera? But it didn't look like that. It didn't look like you guys had just put that together, whatever it looked like. It was like full on.
Oh, no.
Amazing,
it was fully ghetto. Yeah, it was completely ghetto.
No, but it worked. So I said Shine, and I don't even know. You can plead the fifth on this one. You don't have to answer it. But after 27 years of playing and putting set lists together and all that, do you have any songs that you go, yeah, maybe let's see if I can make it through one more night?
Not really, probably the difference between like me and you, it's like when you speak in front of pretty much the same people every week. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's like the songs might be the same, but the people are always different.
Right.
So you have to always keep that in the back of your mind. And two, it's like I never complain about playing certain songs. It's like I don't it's like, oh really, do I have to go out there and do what I love for a living?
Sure.
It's like I would never complain about that. So
yeah.
I mean, sure. Are there some you enjoy playing more than others? Definitely. But
there's like the artists who, if you watch certain programs and maybe they had like one hit, right? But then I heard one guy say that one hit has taken care of my family for whatever. He goes, how many times you want to hear it?
Absolutely.
So it's there is like a joy in that.
Yeah, I think there's a balance. You got to give fans. Some bands will not play the hits, and there's got to be a balance. You got to give people what they're there for, and then also give them a little taste of what you're doing.
Yeah. So like one little side thing that we had to talk about. So if we got away from the Newsboys for a second, like you talked about DJing and all that kind of stuff. You still do that. Like you're kind of like the life of the party when it comes to making it happen, right?
I have an alter ego DJ that comes out mostly at Christmas, sometimes for parties here and there. But yeah, I do. We have a Christmas party. Well, back when you could have parties,
right?
We had parties at Michael's house at Christmas time and DJ and that's we've always been a band that's been good friends, and our families always hang out together, and we always enjoy listening to good music together and all that kind of stuff. So
I was just watching an episode of Seinfeld on Hulu, and it was the episode where they get invited to the party, and Jerry wants to be in charge of the music. And so when I bring that up, I go, if Jeff's at your party, Jeff's in charge of the music.
Pretty much. Even on the bus, we have like the front lounge and the back lounge of the bus, and I usually DJ the back lounge, and then there's clientele in the front lounge that have their own thing too. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so it'd be good. I haven't heard too much, but during this whole quarantine stuff, you said you been doing stuff on putting music out and putting things together.
Well, it's just basically just something to do for fun. So what we've been doing for the last 3 years, actually, we were talking about Peter and Phil. They've been back with us for the last 3 years, and we've been doing these Newsboys United shows, and we did a record together, the 6 of us, and we've been touring together for the last 3 years. Touring was this thing where people would come to a show and watch you play.
Right. Way back in the day, back in history.
Back in the day. So anyway, during quarantine, I was thinking to myself, well, it was a really interesting time period, like we were talking about. For me, I haven't spent this much time in a row in one place in 27 years. And so, and then, you're so busy, you're always on the move. And it got me thinking, being home a lot got me thinking, a little bit nostalgic, thinking about records I haven't thought about in a long time. So I did like a series of mixes on YouTube where I was just mixing really old Newsboys songs with really new ones, and between the 2 lead singers, and mixing them all together just to see what that would be like. And then I was like, oh, that was kind of fun. And I was doing some dance party mixes for families to kill their time at home too, while they're.
So you just put those on YouTube and just
they're all up there for free.
Oh, we'll put that in the description and details and all that stuff.
Yeah,
people can check
they're all
out.
Themed by different themes and
So how was it weird when Peter Furler comes back and you got Michael Tate singing here, and then you have this whole song lineup of Peter Furler songs and this whole song lineup of Michael Tate songs, and then you got to put the set list together?
It was, nobody wanted any part of that. They were like, here, you do it. And that took about 3 months, because I knew it was coming, and I knew they were coming back, and I knew we were going to do it. But we hadn't announced it yet, and we were just talking about it amongst ourselves. And I was like, man, I better get going on this, because it's going to be a lot of songs. And I think in that particular tour, we did 30 songs in one night. We didn't have any opening bands because we didn't need to.
Yeah, right.
And so we
There's
just
enough
played.
Songs.
Yeah, so it was cool. Some songs the lead singers would guest on each other's sets, and then some we just did completely separate, and some together. And but it was really weird, because a lot of those songs I didn't think I would ever play again live. I didn't know any of this was going to happen. Actually, I had to go up into my attic and find all my old hard drives and stuff. And I think that's right around the time we met. I was working on some of that and putting that all together, trying to find the videos, because there, I couldn't find, I wanted to have videos to put behind us, because videos were such a big part of your show back then.
Right.
Or just anything, and, I had to call up TBN in California and see if they had a couple things in their vault, and they did. And they sent them to me.
Question. We're kind of doing this thing. And it's difficult to do, because finding the songs, putting a song set list together, period, is difficult, because you got to find what songs work together in an order.
Yeah.
And then mixing in the fact that, oh, wait, I have too many songs with this singer and not enough with this singer, and I got to make sure... and now it's Christian music, so nobody has egos. That's not a problem.
No. So that's the great thing about being a Christian, is that it completely gets rid of anyone's ego.
Right, exactly. So you don't have to worry about that. So I mean, definitely a unique challenge to figure out.
It was fun. I we really enjoyed those shows together, and I'm sure it's something we'll do, every few years or whatever happens down the road. But it was interesting getting back together to even rehearse. One thing I learned is that songs in the 90s are a lot longer than songs now.
Really?
Oh yeah, I had to cut down, get rid of that verse. No, we don't need verse 3. It's out of here. And that guitar solo, nope, we don't do those anymore.
No need.
Yeah, because it's like when you notice it in people's faces when you're playing. Like if your song is over about 2 minutes, people are like, okay, what's next? You know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right. Just give me the hook. Just give me the hook.
I just want the meat,
and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
So, hey, last thing, just real quick, we were talking about this beforehand. You know, this has been the longest stretch of time, you said, in 27 years that you've been home, hanging out and doing all this stuff. And, like, what are some things that you've enjoyed? I mean, it probably at first was like a good refresher, wasn't it? And then, like, what are some things now, even just being home, that you've been able to do to, like, kind of get to know yourself again?
Well, yeah, it's been a roller coaster of emotions, and people that know me, I wouldn't say would call me like emotionally unstable person. Like I'm pretty like hopefully most people would say I'm fairly grounded, but like anybody, I mean, it's really it's really been interesting. For one thing, this is the longest I've been home in a row. My wife was 9 months pregnant through this whole thing, or 8 months pregnant. So being home every day and watching her, and then the birth of our fourth daughter, and knowing that I was actually going to be there for it 100%, which wasn't always a given in the past with the other kids, and then being there every day with my 3 other kids, it was a big change, because usually you're going in and out of town, in and out of the airport, saying hello, saying goodbye, sleeping on buses. The band is like your family too. You're used to that life on the road. Yeah. You're used to playing and seeing fans and all that stuff. It's an awesome job. It's good work if you can get it. So for all of us in the band, it's like all that was just instantly stripped away. We haven't done a show since March. And two, all of our band and crew, like we've talked about before, are paid per show. It's like touring is how we make a living. So pretty much everything in our lives has just been completely taken away. Yeah. So it's a roller coaster. My wife and I have had a lot of discussions about, finding the positives in this whole thing, and like anybody, just trusting God. So important right now, and keeping each other's spirits up. She'll have days where she's down, or I have days where I'm down, and we lift each other up, which is awesome. And looking at the big picture of things, that God really is in control. And here we are forced to use our faith. So that's cool. And also just spend lots of time with the kids, every single day, which is cool. Like through this whole thing too, I have my dad's been battling terminal brain cancer, so I've been keeping my eye on that situation and talk to him every day. And I'm between that and this, like 2020 has been, like, for most people, pretty crazy, right? So it's every day is a gift, and finding the good things in every day, because, and staying out of the news and as much as you can, and focusing on God's promises has been a big thing. Yep. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah. Jeff Frankenstein of Newsboys, for being here and just talking and
my pleasure.
The process of things, and I'm thankful for you and just your dedication to ministry and being a part of this band that has been such a awesome influence to so many people. So
thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Keep it up, man. And we'll be praying. And one of these days, you may even go back on tour again. Yes. They may allow tours to happen again at some point, and you'll be playing the music again.
It's going to happen again. Yeah. It will. It's just a matter of time. So, but there's, I'm a big believer that there's, God has a plan, and he doesn't take you to a certain point and just drop you off and say, well, we're done. There's always something, like you've talked about in all your messages, even before this started. God has a plan in everything. So, and that's very obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.